Welcome everyone to Mailfuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about the X-Files Season 2, Episode 17. It's called Endgame. So spoilers for the episode, and I will spare you any dumb Marvel jokes because of the name Endgame. This is the second half of a two-parter, which was kind of a wild first half, in all honesty, and the second half is still fairly wild. It's kind of a weird structure to an episode, but I guess that's to be expected because it's the second half of a story and not like one singular story, beginning, middle, and end. But I definitely felt as I was going through it that it felt like it was sort of cut up into segments where there was like, okay, here's 10 minutes resolving what the end of the first half was, what the cliffhanger was at the end of the last episode. And here's the middle portion of the episode that's about this. And then the last 15 minutes is about this crazy trip to Alaska for Mulder and all this submarine stuff that's set up at the start of the episode. We get a little tease of the submarine before we get into like dealing with the cliffhanger from last time. And there's definitely stuff I liked across the board in this episode. There's something that I felt relieved about. And I would also say that there was a moment in this episode where I really had this feeling of, okay, this woman claiming to be Mulder's sister, it better turn out that she's not the sister, because otherwise this is very, very underwhelming. This is it. His missing sister shows up, gives us this story, and then immediately dies in the very next episode. That would be extremely underwhelming. However, what it turns out to be instead is that the woman that Mulder's sister was, quote unquote, is actually the female clone of the so there's two types of clone, right? There's this man who's got a bunch of clones, and then there's a woman with a bunch of clones, and that's who this Mulder's sister character has been, right? She's one of those clones pretend to be Mulder's sister. What I did like about it though is that I did immediately have the question, once it was revealed that she was one of the clones, and we could tell that because she disintegrated into the green, toxic ooze that the other clones have died in. Once they revealed she was a clone, my first thought honestly was like, well, they seem to know a lot about Mulder's life and his sister to make this play, to make this charade to try and like convince him to help, because that's ultimately what it was. It was to try and give him a personal reason to care about their plight, to make Agent Mulder help them in their struggles, which is the fact that they're being hunted by this bounty hunter, who, by the way, is successful by the end of the episode. It seems like he's done his job. He's killed all the clones and he's back to his home planet. So it's kind of interesting to think about it that way. But one of these clones, when Mulder goes looking for, on the breadcrumb trail, there was a note left behind by the supposed sister, saying to go to this clinic, and that's where he finds more of her and realizes that this was all a lie, that was never his sister, and this is actually the clones. One of them does say what I was thinking, which is that they know about his sister. We do know who she is. There's a reason why we knew who she was and why we were able to lie in the way we were. We know so much about her because we know her. And that, I think, was a nice middle ground by the end of this plot to make me feel like, okay, you know what? This came on so strong last episode with, oh, your sister's here, she's back, she's alive, and she had amnesia, and it was all kind of big and bombastic, and it felt a little bit like unreal, partly because it was unreal, so maybe I shouldn't fault that so much, but there was definitely like, oh, I hope this isn't just as what it is appearing to be. But the idea that this was something they were using because they've actually encountered his sister, meaning she is out there somewhere. Now, whether that out there somewhere is on Earth or on a spaceship somewhere or on another planet somewhere is another discussion to be had. But that's what this ultimately becomes about is Mulder hunting for more information about his sister. And is she really alive? Is she really out there somewhere? And effectively gets a confirmation from the villain when he hunts him down to Alaska and confronts him in the submarine. He basically, the guy does admit that she is alive. He knows who he's talking about. Like this bounty hunter, when Mulder says, where is she or is she alive? The bounty hunter knows who he's referring to. And that's kind of a big deal, right? It kind of suggests that at least this alien species might be the one involved in taking her sister, or at the very least, the community of different alien species that convene sometimes, like they know about her. That like it definitely suggests a lot of connections. It suggests that the abduction of certain people on Earth is important to some aliens, and that there's I don't know, like it definitely builds a bit of a picture that's intriguing as opposed to just the here's the quick answer that it felt like they were given as last episode. So I like that. I also like Mulder's drive and obsession sort of kicking in again when he gets to that point, and it is kind of wild that he goes to Alaska and we get this fairly elaborate set of the tip of the submarine like poking out of the ice, right? Because the whole opening of the episode tells us that they're sailing under ice, and this alien ship's nearby, and they're basically told to go and investigate it. It's kind of a little bit like Alien, where they call in, hey, there's this weird unidentified craft in the water. What should we do? And like Weyland-Yutani, the government or whoever are like, oh, like I don't care if you're not like an exploration ship, or I don't care if you're not a combat ship. Go and check it out. And the captain tries to argue against it, but like, no, we need to know. Go and check it out. There may be alien eggs on there that are super important for weapons of mass destruction. But that tease was again kind of wild in the context of coming in after that cliffhanger, and then that being where we start this episode off. It felt big. It felt bold. I like the atmosphere of all that stuff. But to rewind a little bit, because I kind of jumped to the ending, and obviously Mulder at the end, his very final line when Scully comes in and like helps save him, and she's sitting by his bedside, is that he didn't get the answer he wanted, but he found the faith to keep looking. This idea that it renewed, you know, because for a brief moment in this episode, right, and by brief moment I mean like the middle 10-15 minutes when he thought his sister was both back but also dead, and that he was responsible for her death, he kind of lost what his life's long purpose had been. It's like all of a sudden everything that made Mulder Mulder was just kind of gone. So that was interesting to see him kind of recapture that by the end. But there is a little period in the middle though where he does think that he's lost his sister, and that he is partly responsible because the bounty hunter wants to trade Scully for him. Scully, the trooper, goes through a glass table, and it was one of those moments during this early part of the episode where Scully's in the room with the shapeshifter. She tries to play coy for a bit, goes for her gun, and then he just grabs her. He's got superhuman strength. So we see like a version of Mulder throw her through this glass table, and but it was one of those moments where you could see it in the foreground, and for the second before it happened, I went, she's going through that table. The only reason why that table is there is because she's going through it, because there's something very satisfying in a movie, or in wrestling, funnily enough, about people going through tables. It's just a satisfying crunch that adds up some oomph to the scene, right? It makes the other person feel super strong. Even the opening of Kill Bill is a good example, with the two ladies fighting and just going through the glass tables. Wooden tables are fun. Glass tables are even more satisfying. It's the crunch, it's the smash, it's all the little bits obliterating fun. Anyway, yeah, so there's a whole trade that's made here. Skinner even gets involved because Skinner comes to see Mulder, and they act all shadowy because they don't know if this is a shapeshifter, but the clone pretending to be Mulder's sister is like, hey, it's not him, I can tell, you know, he's looking for me because I know how to kill him. But it turns out, of course, he's just looking for her and all the others like her because they're just also the clones that he's here to kill, right? He's killing them just like he's killing all the male clones that he's already done. He's already finished that. In fact, that's why Skinner shows up to Mulder. He's like, hey, Scully like put 4 guys into like protective jail custody and they're all turned up dead. This is strange. Where is Scully? And Mulder's like, oh yeah, she's being kidnapped. Don't ask too many questions, Skinner. This is really above your puny human brain. That's not what he says. I'm just adding some color for funs. To be fair, I'm making fun of the Skinner inclusion here. I do think it's interesting in this episode that, one, he does trust Mulder enough to back him up at this thing where he's sitting with a sniper and they're trying to like help get Scully back, right? And we get a whole big sort of tense standoff scene, and the sniper takes the shot, which is what sends the bounty hunter and the clone slash sister into the water. But he makes this trade, and it leads to him having to tell his father that he's lost his sister again. So we get this, and honestly, in a lot of ways, I think I might say this. I think this is my least favorite scene in the episode, is the scene where Mulder has to talk to his father. And I think the reason I don't like it very much is, one, obviously it turns out to be kind of null and void because it wasn't really his sister. So in retrospect, it feels a little bit like, whatever. Okay, yeah, the dad's angry and he's like, oh, do you have any idea what this will do to your mother to lose her again? But I think the other reason why, even in the moment, I wasn't loving it super much is because the father was only just introduced last episode. He was very cold to begin with. And I guess it felt a little bit like overly melodramatic. Like the father's been introduced just to be this like harsh father figure who Mulder doesn't get along with. And he has no depth beyond that yet. He's pretty one note so far in his appearances. I think this might have had a lot more impact if there was a moment where Mulder and his father had bonded, maybe late last episode, because he was happy that his daughter was back. Maybe they would have a little moment where, you know, that icy veneer kind of like cracks a little bit and a bit of humanity comes out. Like maybe he's bonding with Mulder, and maybe even suggests that they're bonding again because the sister's back, and maybe that's been a rift between them all these years. But he's not. You know, we had one big scene with him last episode. He was kind of a cold prick, even though the news was happy. And then here, he's just disappointed, angry father who blames Mulder for everything. And it just didn't have a lot of depth for me. As much as you're setting up Mulder's guilt, and obviously he gets emotional and says sorry and all the rest of it, it still was probably my least favorite scene of the episode, because it felt very forced to me. But the other thing with Skinner, though, that was really interesting this episode is so Mulder goes to Mr. X to find out where to go, right? Where is this guy? What's going on? And this is how he finds out about Alaska and the submarine and the ship and all that, and that's what sends him on his way. So Mulder disappears, and Scully is looking for Mulder. She's concerned. She's asking around. She can't find him. And it gets to the point where she goes to Skinner and asks for help. And she's like basically saying, this is off the record. I want your help to find Mulder. This is something really personal. Can you use some unofficial channels to find out where Mulder is? And Skinner just says that he can't help her. But there's a little moment after she leaves the office where he kind of like punches the desk a little bit and is clearly feeling something. Like there's a bond growing between him and his two kids, Mulder and Scully. But that's not even the interesting part. This is just a setup for the interesting part. The interesting part is there's a scene here, and this is actually fascinating for multiple reasons, where Scully is staying in Mulder's apartment, waiting for him to hopefully come home, and Mr. X shows up at the door, clearly expecting to find Mulder, right? Not knowing that Mulder's left. And Scully's like, do you know where Mulder is? Tell me where Mulder is. And Mr. X, unlike Deep Throat, who actually did kind of eventually meet Scully and talk to her and whatever, Mr. X just plays dumb and says, sorry, I must have the wrong apartment, and walks away quietly and very stoically as Scully keeps saying, no, please tell me where Mulder is. I need to know where Mulder is. She clearly thinks this is someone who knows something. Whether or not she knows that Mr. X exists as the second Deep Throat, or she's just sort of putting two and two together because of the way he's shown up, it doesn't really matter. But she clearly believes this is someone who knows something. And he just no-sells her, says there's been a misunderstanding, and just walks out. And I thought that performance was really interesting from Steve Williams, who just kind of walks out almost like a robot, just trying to ignore her and be very civil. It was very much like something like a switch had turned. And then he gets to the bottom of the elevator, though. Well, what do I mean? Like the elevator goes to the the ground floor, is what I mean to say. And Skinner is standing there. And I also got the vibe that he was probably just here to come see Scully, knowing she was here. Right? Because he did have information for her. I don't think he gets the information from Mr. X. Maybe he does, right? It's honestly, it's unclear if he already has some information or he gets all of his information from Mr. X, because we don't see what Mr. X actually gives him at the end of the scene. But Skinner immediately looks at Mr. X and says, did you tell her what she wanted to know? Skinner clearly has an understanding of some way who this guy is. Whether or not he knows specifically who he is, or he just has an idea, kind of like Scully just assumed who he was and that he's someone with information, or is it someone he directly knows, maybe even before Mulder knew who this guy was? I don't know. But he immediately says, did you tell her what she wanted to know? And Mr. X just, again, plays dumb. And Skinner, I can only describe this scene as a headbutt fight, where Skinner grabs him and they both headbutt each other. I don't even remember who headbutts who first. I genuinely don't remember. But there's a headbutt going in both directions at one point. It feels kind of visceral, it feels kind of violent, and he's like, no. Mr. X pulls a gun, Skinner's like, look, if you kill me, you're killing 2 men today. And that's kind of where the scene ends. But this is fascinating because Skinner, like, not only is he showing that he cares about Mulder and Scully, and not only is he stepping in, but he's stepping in with a lot more fire than I think I was ready to see him step in with. And I'm not complaining about that. That's actually kind of exciting. It's like, oh shit, he's going above and beyond. He's really got out of his way here to help. That's kind of interesting. It's fascinating to see, like, how much he actually cares and how far he's willing to go. So when it cuts to him at the door and Scully answers the apartment door, and Skinner's like standing there with like a cut in his head, he's got blood coming from various places, and he explains where Mulder's went, which is how ultimately Scully ends up sort of going to help with Mulder's medical issue at the end. Which, if I have a critique, is that it's almost at the virus part of this, right? So Scully and some doctors like analyze like the dead bodies from before, the FBI agent, whoever, and this like toxic gas or whatever that comes off these clones when they're killed, and the green goo is disintegrating. At least when they first bubble. I mean, I think when it's just a pull afterwards, it's not that lethal. I mean, I'd probably advise taking a spoonful and having a taste, but it seems like it's probably fine in terms of like airborne. It's not airborne anymore. That's what I was trying to say. Anyway, Mulder, because he shoots the bounty hunter on the sub at the end, like he starts like wincing in pain and covering his face, like, oh, the smell is he's being infected. He's breathing in these toxins, whatever. And I had completely forgotten that the first scene of last episode was this whole, like, oh, Mulder's in medical danger, and Scully comes in and says, no, the cold's the only thing keeping him alive. I had completely forgotten about that. So by the time we got to it in this episode, and Scully's, like, investigating this toxin, is like, oh, this is weird. Like, if you cool it down, it stops being effective, and it was only because the body got warm again that it started to eat her face, right? That's what they kind of establish. So when she comes in at the end and she's like, oh, the only thing you're going to do is kill him if you try and heat him up. We have to keep him cold and then sort of deal with the virus in other ways. We have to have some antiviral stuff, blah, blah, blah. Right? Bunch of medical talk. And it works and it's fine. But if I have a critique, is that honestly, I feel like all the virus and toxic like element of it and Mulder needing to be saved like this didn't really feel like it was that necessary or added that much to the episode. The whole, like, there's something to cure, or there's some sort, like, I feel like you could have just had Mulder be found after he rolls out the way of the submarine, like, wing that's about to hit him as it's going down, which was almost a kind of a funny scene, actually. I have to make fun of that a little bit, is that I know that he can't see it properly. The idea is that the toxins, like, clouded his vision and he's, like, half unconscious or whatever. But there was actually something mildly amusing about how slow this thing was coming down to his head, and then him just sort of slowly realizing and rolling out the way. But you could have just said he had hypothermia, and Scully could have come and like met him in the hospital, and when he finally woke up, like, they have their little moment together. I don't know if the whole he's got this alien and like toxin in him that we have to cure, and the doctor here's wrong because he doesn't understand the toxin. I honestly don't know if we needed any of that or what it added to the episode, other than just, here's one last little bit of, like, high-tension drama. But the high-tension drama is, you know, it's kind of phony, right? I mean, Mulder's the main character of the show, or one of 2 main characters of the show. Now, that's not to say that you can never threaten the life of the main characters. You can. In fact, we often do, and it can be very effective. But I think if you're going to just tack on a little thing to give you one last little oomph of, like, tension, because, oh, they might die, that doesn't work with a main character. It's fine when you have a big sort of like dramatic thing where they might die, because there's a lot of like thematic and emotional reasons why it'll affect them, why it'll affect the others around them. Are they willing to die for a reason? Do they think they're going to die? And we can explore how they respond to that. There's a lot of like good things that can come from having main characters thinking they're going to die or being in jeopardy, where it can still be effective storytelling, even if you as the audience never really think that they're going to actually die, right? That's fine. Like, every single story, especially TV shows, have to deal with that. It's far more likely that a character will die in a movie at the end than it is in a TV show where they have to be here for seasons and seasons and seasons, unless something big is changing that they're planning for. But when you sort of tack it on as just a little bit extra like this towards the end of the episode, and I realize, yes, they showed this at the start of the last part, like in the first episode, but ultimately, one of the critiques I had in the first part of this two-parter was that cold open threatening that Mulder was in danger and that he had something unique in him that had to be cured felt so disconnected, because nothing else in the episode felt like it linked up with it. In this episode, I don't really feel that much different, because ultimately it's just this thing that they kind of like shoehorn in towards the end of the episode. And it doesn't feel like we built up to, oh, this is why Mulder's got this unique like virus or something. The two episodes did not focus or revolve around the idea of a mysterious like toxin that was affecting people. That's not what they were focusing on with the victims. In fact, they barely brought it up. Right? These two episodes were far more interested in part one about the shapeshifter fun of it and the clones. Part two was way more about is she the sister? No, she isn't. What does that mean for Mulder? And the sort of the hunt for answers with this clone and all that stuff. The toxin feels like an afterthought. The whole Mulder's sick from it and might die if Scully doesn't have the whereabouts to come in and sort of direct the doctors to react appropriately just feels like an afterthought to me versus everything else in the two episodes. And it just feels like it's there for, not even for the end of the episode, honestly. It feels more like they just wanted that tease at the start of the first episode, because they wanted to be like, oh god, Mulder might die. Let's get there and find out how they stop it. But it's not like we build up in an interesting way to that particular element, right? Of how does Mulder get infected. It's not really that big a deal. It's not that important, and it's not really what the episodes are focusing on as a whole. It's not like they're going through multiple dead bodies and going, man, what's killing all these people? It's some weird toxin. And then we understand how dangerous it is. So by the time that a main character gets infected, we go, oh shit, this is really bad, because we've seen what this does to other people. That's not how these episodes progressed at all. It's not something that they were remotely focusing on. So it just felt really weird and tacked on to me. So yeah, really mixed about that element of it towards the end. But I did like Mulder's trip to Alaska. It was kind of big and like, oh, we're going to Alaska. It's kind of like in the same way last time. I was like, oh, we're doing all this clone stuff. Oh, they're aliens, actually. Oh, the sister's back. This kind of had a little bit of that shock and awe as well, where it was like, no, the sister's just a clone. Oh, she's not really dead. Oh, the sister's still out there. Oh, Mulder's going to Alaska. He's on a submarine. Like, just lots of big swings, which, like, I think are almost a little hit and miss in terms of which ones work for me, but they're all, generally speaking, I'm entertained by what it's doing. So that's something to enjoy. And I do like Mulder and Scully caring about each other. That's kind of the heart of the show, and it's something that, you know, Scully being miffed that she was ditched by Mulder and him apologizing for it. It's one of the more heartfelt moments of the show, of this episode specifically. So as far as like the second half to the two-parter, I mean, I think in some ways it's a bit weird, because I feel like the entire build-up of that first half was all about this shapeshifter and the clones, and he could be anyone. And in this episode, it feels like we deal with the whole abduction of Scully by a shapeshifter who looks like Mulder. We deal with that by about the 10-minute mark or something silly like that. And then the fact that he's a shapeshifter doesn't really feel like it's that important as much in the rest of the episode. It's not really what they're using all that much. But it does go and do other different interesting things. I guess it just continues what I said about the last one, in that it kind of like kept changing course constantly throughout the episode. And that's true for the whole two-parter. It never really felt like it settled on one key idea that this is what we're going to explore now till the end. It kept kind of making these turns For better or worse. Sometimes better, because sometimes it kept me on my toes and it was doing different things. But sometimes it also took away from maybe some of the impact of maybe some of the things that we're building up to in the first place. Also, I want to point out that when Mulder goes to see the other clones at this clinic, and then it turns out the shapeshifters followed him there, and presumably that's how he's just then killed all the rest of the clones, including the original that all the clones have come from. He gets knocked out by the shapeshifter when the shapeshifter comes into the building, and then the shapeshifter goes on his way, and then it cuts to later, and there's fire trucks there, and the building's on fire, and a firefighter comes up and finds Mulder still passed out on the floor. Now, I get that this may only be actually like 20 minutes later, but I did sort of chuckle because I thought to myself, how long's Mulder been asleep? It feels like he's sleeping through all this fire. The entire building's set ablaze, and he's just having a nap on the floor. Now, I get that he might have a concussion. He might be very, very seriously hurt. These are all possibilities, but it just kind of made me laugh because it felt like time had passed, and it felt kind of weird. Anyway, entertaining episode. I think it's got some flaws. I think there's some ups and downs. I think there's stuff that I really like. I like the implication of like, okay, he's actually heard an alien being reference his sister. Multiple, in fact. Between the clones and the bounty hunter, we've heard references to his sister being out there and being alive. Whether that's on Earth, on a different planet. The fact that they all know about his sister says that it seems like she's quite important to at least some aliens. That's kind of interesting. My scene of the episode, before I wrap up, I think it has to be the elevator scene. I think it has to be Daddy Skinner coming to fight for the rights of Mulder and Scully. And because I was expecting him to like grab him and do a little bit of hold him up against the wall, which he does as well. But I was expecting that and be like, damn it, you're going to tell them what they want to know. I was not expecting headbutts. That went up to 11 in a way that I quite wasn't prepared for, and I was entertained by it, and I found myself really rooting for that bald bastard by the end of the scene. Way to go, Skinner. Protected his kids as he should. So that's my thoughts on Endgame. Let's have a look and see what's coming next week from X-Files. We have an episode called Fearful Symmetry. Here's the description on IMDb. In a small town in Idaho, a man is killed by what seems to be an invisible elephant. Okay, I'm sold. Right, there's more to it, but I'm sold already. Invisible elephant. Mulder's investigation into the local zoo, its owners, and local animal rights group uncover evidence of an insidious alien experiment. The rest of that was whatever. Killed by an invisible elephant is all you had to say. I'm at least intrigued. Okay? I'm at least intrigued. Let's see how that goes. Thank you for joining me, everyone. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. And of course, you can like, subscribe, all the usual things. They all help out. So thank you very much. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?